We are going to switch gears, head overseas to the Middle East. The other big story of the day is Gaza, specifically Hamas officially responding to President Trump's 20-point plan to end the war in Gaza, cease the fighting in the enclave, and bring the hostages home. It's something that we've been discussing often with Dr. Alon Burstein. Alon has guided us through much of the 2 years of this war, and I got to say, Alon, a lot of major developments today. This might be one of the more sizable news days we've seen since this war began. I'm going to start with this tweet from Axios' Barak Ravid. He says, at the directive of the political echelon, the IDF will shift to defensive operations only in the Gaza Strip, and then will halt the operation to occupy Gaza City. That's according to a senior Israeli official. Is this the initial signs that something big is actually progressing here?
It's good to see you, Austin. I mean, there's so many signs with regards to what happened today. It's, as you said, one of the biggest and most charged days within the deal-making attempts of the war. I'm not saying within the war, because the truth is the deal has not been reached yet. Sides have talked about the deal. They've talked about the possibility of a deal. They've signaled their willingness to deal. Everyone's reading slightly differently what the other side has said. If you look at the actual wording of each side's response, none of them are actually accepting Trump's deal wholeheartedly, but they're all saying we're willing to talk about it. So it's not, I'm not yet saying this is the biggest day of the war because we're at the point where the war is ending. What I will say is that in terms of the attempts to bring the sides together and say there's a framework to work with, and the sides are actually showing some willingness, whether compelled into that willingness or for other reasons, this is the closest we've gotten to the sides being willing to talk about an end to the war, even though each one is framing what's happening actually through their own different sides. And this issue with the IDF stopping the offensive operations to take over Gaza City and moving to more defensive operations is one of the big stories of how this has played out. Because how this has played out is not the sides moving closer together to compromise. This has played out as a result of Trump basically signaling to both sides, I have had it. Signaling to Israel, we spoke about this, you and me, the other day about his meeting with Netanyahu, and signaling, I've had it with the war and I've had it the way things are going, and I want you to move forward with this deal now. And using Qatar, Turkey, and other countries to signal to Hamas, I've had it. I've had it. This is no longer, we can keep playing around. So both sides, rather than moving closer together in their positions, have all come together based on what Trump said. And why did the IDF now why did the political echelon order the IDF to stop its attacks in Gaza right now? Because Trump said so. It's not because the sides are already making a deal. It's because Trump specifically said Israel has to stop the bombing in Gaza. Lo and behold, that's probably what's happening.
We are seeing blasts live on air. It just happened right now. So if there are any blasts, and by the way, we should make something clear, just because Axios is saying that the IDF is signaling a move to a defensive operation, that doesn't mean that that's begun quite yet. What we could still be seeing are offensive actions.
No, but I will say that the Israeli military itself put out an announcement saying that they have been ordered to take precautions and to prepare for implementing Trump's deal. Not exactly the words of Axios, not exactly saying it's halting all of its offensive abilities, but there clearly was an order, and the IDF has made this public. And again, this is because it's speaking to Trump. Trump said Israel has to stop the bombing in Gaza. Wouldn't you know, 2 hours later, the Israeli military is putting out an announcement saying that it has been ordered to not take any action that may endanger the implementation of Trump's plan. What that means, I mean, yeah, you and I are seeing right now, there's still probably active fighting there. But what that means is that that fighting is, I would estimate, more likely something to do with holding lines, right? This typically, unfortunately, we've seen in many wars, and particularly in the Middle East, as we draw closer to a ceasefire, each side also wants to have one final crowning achievement. So maybe we'll see a Hamas attempt to infiltrate an IDF outpost, or maybe an IDF attempt to arrest some high-ranking figure. But the major offensives, the taking out buildings, detonating entire areas, that we're probably not going to see, at least until there's another development. I'm not saying it's over, but at least until there's another development.
You and I were talking earlier today offline, and you made a point that I think is important to bring up on TV. there's a certain amount of prerequisites that would have to happen before we even see hostages taken to safety. There was an initial response from Hamas today. Some people were confused with how it was worded. There was some speculation at first as to, is Hamas agreeing to release the hostages immediately? And again, it was because some of the phrasing in it was a little bit confusing. Can you lay out the absolute soonest possible time that we could see something like that happen? There's a lot of mechanics that go into something like this.
So I'll say two things. I'll say what are the built-in holdups that there are in Trump's plan, because Trump's plan was not a fully fleshed out program for what should happen. It was a framework. It was a framework that both sides, again, are saying publicly we agree to, but each side is emphasizing a different part of what they agree to. They agree to what is important to them, not what's important to the other side. So first, I'll relate a little bit to the built-in problems that still need to be worked out in Trump's plan. And then, if it's okay, if we have time, I'll talk a little bit about Hamas's response and what was glaring to me in that response. When it comes to what's built into Trump's plan, the framework idea, and again, we're seeing blasts still going on in Gaza. So, despite the messages of the IDF, clearly fighting is still happening there. In Trump's plan, there's a framework that says hostages will be released within 72 hours. It doesn't exactly say since when that clock started. It says in the deal, since the moment that Israel publicly agrees to this deal. That doesn't make sense. Hamas has to agree to release the hostages, not Israel. Is that since Netanyahu agreed? That's not how you make deals. Deals are signed between negotiators. So first thing, it's unclear when the clock would start for those 72 hours. Point number one. Point number two, within that deal of releasing all the hostages, Trump's plan says 250 life-sentenced Palestinians in Israeli jails will be released, as well as 1,700 Palestinians that have been arrested in the Gaza Strip since October 7th, including all women and children. That may sound accurate. It's actually quite vague. There are close to, we're seeing now light bombs going off in the areas of Gaza. That's what IDF fires, flares. They're called colloquially light bombs into the sky. And by the way, I'll say that the fact that those flares are going up might indicate that this is actually more ground fighting and not bombings, because usually light bombs are sent up when there's active ground fighting. When we say 250 life sentence Palestinians would be released, the question of who those Palestinians are is a critical question. Hamas has demanded that the top Palestinian prisoners, Marwan Barghouti, Ahmed Saadat, and others, be released. Israel has said they will release other life sentence prisoners, not them. This deal does not say who decides which Palestinian prisoners are released. In what order? Are they all released at the same time as the hostages are released? Who gets to decide that? Saying 1,700 Gazans arrested, including all women and children. Does that mean all women and children and then making up to 1,700? These things may sound like technicalities. They are what can make or break a deal. So that is one of the first things that will have to be negotiated. Even if both sides, this is what I told you earlier today, even if both sides were to sit down today and say, I am willing to sign on those 20 points right now, it cannot be implemented in the next 72 hours. There still has to be negotiated who the prisoners would be and who gets to decide. And the second point, and this is one of the critical points, the redeployment lines. The map that the White House put out showed 3 different lines in the Gaza Strip. Those lines are not accurate. They're not military lines. They're not lines that take into account where the major cities are. They are broad lines showing the gradual withdrawal and redeployment of the IDF. When this happens, how does this happen? The plan is not clear. It says after the release of the hostages. Does that mean within a day? Does that mean within a month? Hamas doesn't trust Israel that they'll do anything if the hostages are released. Certainly Israel doesn't trust Hamas that it's not going to resume fighting the moment that it can. So all these things still have to be worked out in Trump's plan, even if we accept the plan as is. So that's point number one. A second point, though, that I think is important to also relate to is what was said in Hamas's message and what was not said, because the message was sort of accepted by Trump, and he has said Hamas appears to be ready for peace. I'd say that's a bit of an exaggeration when we look at the actual wording of what the group published. And I'm not going to read the whole thing here, but some of the critical points is they start from heaping praise on seeing a lot of blasts now. They start from heaping praise on Arab and Islamic leaders and also on President Trump himself for trying to end the war in Gaza. And then they do say, And I'm reading now. In this framework, and in line of achieving complete ceasefire and a full withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, Hamas announces its approval of releasing all Israeli captives, living and remains, within the framework of exchange outlined in President Trump's proposal, provided that the necessary field conditions for the exchange are secured. That's an important wording. Hamas is saying they're going to do that so long as they can do this appropriately, what they consider in the field. That may mean they demand the IDF withdrawal in advance. They have also announced that they've lost contact with some of the captives. The guards are holding captives. They may say, we don't know where they are. It may take time. Then the movement says that they also reaffirm their agreement to transfer the administration of the Gaza Strip to a Palestinian authority composed of independent technocrats based on national consensus. That is different than what it says in Trump's plan. Trump's plan does not say that authority is going to be handed over to a Palestinian authority. It says an international body is going to take over the Gaza Strip and eventually, after several years, be handed over to a Palestinian authority. Hamas has not agreed to that. And the third thing that they say, and with this I'll end, we're just quoting Hamas, the third thing that they say is that all other matters concerning the future of Gaza are tied to a unified national Palestinian stance. Basically, they're saying, we can't answer this ourselves. All Palestinians have to answer this. What they don't relate to at all is the question of disarming. Israel has said that they will not go forward with a deal unless it includes Hamas disarming and giving up its weapons. Hamas put out this message. Trump, I think, thinks from his end that he's going to bring both sides together and start the process, and hopefully they'll figure out that it's better to make peace, which is why he embraced this and looked at it from the perspective of, well, I guess Hamas is ready for peace, but they do not mention demilitarizing. They do not mention disarming. These are key aspects of Hamas's deal. I think that Israel's very surprised that Trump accepted this. Israel probably expected to reject this, saying Hamas has rejected this because they're not relating to Trump's deal. But Trump has accepted this, so now we're going to start negotiations, but we're not at the point where both sides have agreed yet.
How likely does it feel that this leads to an end to the Gaza war?
So really what will matter is what is worked out in the coming days. Very likely what we're going to see now, especially since, I would say especially since Trump said stop bombing Gaza and the IDF said that they have, although what we're seeing on screen live indicates that that's not the case. But if that was the case, if we actually have Trump stepping in, and Trump has influence on Israel more than anyone else. He has influence on Arab countries also, who they might have influence on Hamas, Qatar, Turkey, Jordan, Egypt, the United Arab Emirates. But Trump can tell Israel do something, and Israel pretty much has to do it at this point. Israel's completely dependent on the United States for so many things. So if Trump says to Israel, stop the war until we're done negotiating, we're going to see the sides jumping into negotiations. What will matter is how tied are the phases one to the next. The deal is supposed to start with all the hostages being released and the idea of withdrawing. And you showed the map of Gaza before, the withdrawal lines that had been depicted in Trump's plan. So the deal is supposed to start with hostages being released and Palestinian prisoners being also released from Israeli jails, and then an idea of redeployment, and then as the deal progresses, moving between these lines, and the Israeli military is supposed to hand over the territory in Gaza gradually to an international Arab force that is going to gradually take control as an interim government, and etc. All these things are phases 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the big question that will determine if this is going to bring an end to the war or not is how tied are they to one another? What we saw in the deal, the first hostage deal of the end of 2023. And then we saw in the second hostage deal in January 2025, we also saw those deals also were an end to the war, but each phase was independent. It was phase 1, and then they'll negotiate phase 2, and then phase 2, and then they'll negotiate the end to the war. There, what will matter is how tied are they to one another. Are hostages going to be released and then the sides have to figure it out? Then probably not. We're probably not seeing an end to the war. The hostages will be released, maybe some of them, maybe all of them, and then we'll see a return to fighting. In turn, if the phases are interlocked with one another, hostages are released, but at the same time the IDF withdraws, and at the same time an Arab force comes in or something like that, then we're more likely to see things developing. It's all going to be determined seemingly in the next coming days of negotiation.
That was my next question. How long until we have clarity on these things? As we go into the weekend, as we go into the early portion of next week, what are going to be the telltale signs for what direction this thing is headed?
So one of the first things that's going to be is who goes to the negotiations. Where are the negotiations held? Are they held in Qatar, that same area where the Hamas leadership had gathered to talk about Trump's previous plan, and on September 9th, Israel tried to assassinate them? Or are they held somewhere else? Maybe they're held in Turkey, maybe they're held in a European country. That will matter. That will show how much of how differently the sides are possibly looking at the current framework. Even though if it's held in Qatar, what will matter is who is sent to the negotiations. In the previous administration, under the Biden administration, we could always tell when the head of the CIA was sent to the negotiations, that meant that it was now the big guns are coming in. Similarly, this time, if Steve Witkoff himself travels to Qatar or wherever the negotiations are, and if Israel sends the head of the Mossad, the actual top negotiators who can make the deals, not the technocrats who are negotiating, but the top people who can actually have authority to sign off on a deal, that is going to indicate how seriously things are possibly have the potential to progress. That is really going to be the make it or break it. It's also important to note that this is something that has seemingly gone by the wayside with all that's happened in the last month. But since September 9th, since that assassination attempt, very few of the Hamas leadership that reside externally have been seen in public. We know that they all survived. We know this because Israel itself has admitted this, and Qatar said so, and Hamas has said so, and the United States has said so. So seemingly all the agencies believe that they survived. But we don't know if maybe one or two of them were injured. We don't know exactly who is going to be possibly running the negotiations. It used to be Khalil al-Haya. Now it may be someone else. Maybe he was injured and maybe someone else. So it's hard to know exactly with the configuration of the Hamas leadership what's going to happen. But in terms of who the United States sends and who Israel sends are going to be big telltales as to where this is going, what direction. And last thing I'll say, there is still a split leadership. Even though right now, technically, all of the Hamas leadership resides abroad, the leader of the Al-Qassam brigades in Gaza, Izzadin Haddad, is actually the one who would have to agree. He's actually the one who would have to agree to lay down arms, stop fighting. I hypothesized today when I was asked in different forums, why didn't Hamas relate to the disarming? I said, I think there's a disagreement. I think Izzadin Haddad does not want to disarm, and the external leadership may say, okay. And so they just decided, let's just not talk about it. Let's not bring it up now. But that is also going to be a big question, not only who goes to the external negotiations, what happens inside Hamas? Because the Hamas external leadership can agree to a lot of things. And you and I talked about this throughout the last 2 years. The Hamas external leadership can agree to a lot of things. If the internal leadership of the Al-Qassam brigades do not go along with it, that agreement is not worth much. So that's also going to be something we have to be looking at.
Is this the closest we've been to a ceasefire in almost 2 years?
Yes.
It's ironic to say that, by the way, as there's live blasts on television.
I know it's a little bit bizarre to be talking about it like this. I'd say that this is the closest that we've been to the possibility of a long-term ceasefire. We have been closer to a hostage deal. We have been in situations where the sides already agreed on how many Palestinians would be released and which ones, and already agreed on the mechanisms. This was in July of 2024. We came extremely close then, and then at first, Hamas didn't answer when Israel agreed in May, and then Israel didn't answer when Hamas agreed in July. So then we were the closest we ever were to a hostage deal, to a framework that may actually pave the way towards the war being declared over. And again, it probably won't be declared over by Hamas or Israel. Both sides will say, we're standing guard and will continue in the future. But being declared over by at least the United States, this is probably the closest we've been. But like I said, it's very important to be emphasizing. Israel announced this evening after Hamas's response, we are preparing to implement the first stage of the deal and the release of the hostages. That is not the end of the war. That is just one aspect of the deal. Hamas is saying that they're willing to talk about the release of hostages and a possible Palestinian technocratic government. That's not the end of the war either. That's not Hamas disarming. That's not actually stopping the fighting. So both sides are telling Trump, please understand that we do agree with you and don't be mad at us. But the next sentences that both sides are saying in terms of what they're agreeing to, they're not talking to each other yet. They're both talking to Trump and saying, we like this side of the deal, like that side of the deal. It's the closest we've been to a framework. But again, I'll say at this point, this framework is being imposed on the sides. It's not them coming to terms with each other. That's probably what will have to happen for the war to end. It'll have to be imposed on both sides. But equally, that's why I'm still a little bit hesitant, because it's not like, look, the sides are realizing that they're this close, they may as well come together. This is right now, both sides are saying yes, pretty much because they're being compelled to do so.
Alon Burstein with some critical context tonight on this busy news day coming out of Gaza. We'll be tracking everything over the weekend as well. Alon is the host of the Israel-Palestine Report. You can give him a subscribe on YouTube. He does his own updates. He talks about the region. He talks about the Israeli-Palestine War, and he breaks things down with the same encyclopedic attention to detail as you saw tonight. He does that on every single one of these reports. Alon, great to see you. We'll talk soon.
Thank you. And let's also say to people to stay tuned. On October 7th, we are going to be doing some sort of segment. We are talking about possibly doing a live show, possibly doing a summary maybe of this deal. So people should stay tuned to that too.
It's not often that you plug our content, but I can't thank you enough for mentioning that. That is true, by the way. We are marking the 2-year mark. Tuesday is going to be October 7th. The plan is for us to do a long live stream, anywhere between an hour to an hour and a half, something like that. The plan is, Alon and I, we're going to take questions from the audience, and we're just going to take your big picture questions, your specific questions, anything anybody wants to know about the past 2 years and the present day. We're going to be available for that. And that's going to be 4 p.m. Eastern time, 1 p.m. Pacific time. We're going to stream it live on YouTube. Feel free to watch along. We'll plug this a few more times between now and then as well. Alon, thanks. Have a good night.